amount of drinking water produced by the two soldiers with enough practical magic aptitude to summon it, they could have even had enough for cooking. As they thought about this, a feeling of vexation began to bubble up inside the captain. The members of the Crimson Vow were not bad people, he knew that much. As leader of the troops, he was merely ashamed at having let the chance to so greatly increase their provisions slip right out from under his nose. "I do have more inside," Miles said offhandedly. "What?" the captain replied, in a hollow voice. "I'm telling you, I've got more in here. A lot of other things." With these words, Miles began to produce a cook surface and stove and cookware and meat and vegetables, along with all other manner of things, one after another from her storage. And slam! Finally, out came a large tank of water. Everyone was speechless, their eyes wide, until Pauline broke the silence. "Water is 5 copper per cup. Bread is 5 copper a piece. Meat and vegetable stew is 5 silver a serving." In truth, if the soldiers had shown themselves to have a bad attitude, then the Crimson Vow would have made only enough for themselves and the other hunters, or else they would have charged the soldiers an exorbitant rate to milk a profit out of them. Yet, despite their expectations, the soldiers had turned out to be decent people, so they decided to charge a more conscientious price. 5 copper pieces was the equivalent of about 50 yen, and 5 silver was roughly 500 yen, so besides the water, none of it was really all that expensive. It was about the same prices as you would find at a restaurant in town. "You've got to be kidding me." This had been a day full of surprises for the captain. Less than an hour later, there was a throng of soldiers gathered around the tent where the Crimson Vow had set up their stove. Already, from the time the cooking started, there had been a number of looky-loos. They watched as the stew pot was filled magically with water, and as Raina carefully sank in a fireball, bringing it to boil in an instant. Mavis chopped the dried wood with her sword in the blink of an eye. Then Raina once again summoned up her fire magic to set it ablaze. After that, they tossed in the ingredients that Mal had chopped and seasoned their food with spices pulled from her storage. The quantity of spices they used meant that the 5 silver for the soup was more than worth the cost. They were doing them a special favor here. There was a strange silence, and suddenly Pauline realized that the soldiers and other hunters were all looking her way. Mal, Raina, and Mavis had all performed their own little shows, so now, Pauline realized, the audience was expecting some kind of trick from her as well. Unfortunately, all of the cooking was now finished. Yet it would be rather dull of her not to do something to contribute to the group's earnings. After hemming and hawing for a few moments, Pauline hit upon an idea. "Get your healing magic. 5 silver per injury. I'll heal you right up, all your scrapes, foot aches, and training injuries, you name it." Her price was ridiculously low. It would be one thing if she were a magic user who was affiliated with their own group, but to get such healing at one of the infirmaries in town staffed by retired former hunters would be far more expensive. There was a limit to the amount of magic every mage could use, after all, so performing mass healing every single day was not possible, which drove up the demand and the price. When traveling in remote areas, conserving precious energy stores was a necessity for mages. No mage would ever wish to waste their magic pointlessly. Thus, you normally waited to deal with everything other than the most serious injuries until you got back to town. For the soldiers of a rural fief, which could not be expected to have a healing mage to assign to every platoon, healing was just left to natural processes even after they returned home. Seriously? The soldiers came running eagerly toward Pauline. Gaping, the hunters were just a beat behind them. Though Mile had not imparted the fundamentals of magic to Pauline, she had taught her more efficient ways of using her healing powers to supplement her already existing abilities. Now it was possible for Pauline to continually use minor healing magic without expending too much energy. Plus, all they had to do tonight once they were finished eating was to go to sleep, so recovering that energy should be no problem. With this many people present, including the rest of the Crimson Vow, there was no reason to think that anything should go awry. The forest was wide, but it was not exactly uncharted territory. As far as everyone knew, there was nothing worse than ogres in these parts. It would be one thing if this expedition were a more lengthy one, but as it stood, they were only scheduled to plumb the depths of the forest and come right back out. It was not as if there would be anywhere else for the soldiers to spend their money. Many of the men had thought of this, of course, and had left their purses at home, but now they scrambled to borrow coin from comrades who always kept their money on them rather than storing it back in their lodgings. There was none among them who would be foolish enough to let the opportunity to get a good meal and healing for a pittance slip out from under their noses. While all this was going on, the meat and veggie stew was completed under Miles' direction, and so the group was able to enjoy a proper meal in the wilderness, without having any supply wagons in tow. It was a feat that, up until that moment, no soldier or hunter could ever have imagined. Seriously, what was with that? I couldn't believe my eyes. After the lively meal was finished and the members of the Crimson Vow retreated to their tent, the Devil's Paradise and the Fellowship of the Flame all sat in a huddle, discussing. First of all, having that much storage space is ridiculous. She's gotta have gotten calls from nobles and merchants, maybe even from a king himself. What's she doing living out here as a hunter? I mean, I don't know, everyone's got their own story. Maybe she wasn't suited to life in court or whatever. I mean, it's not like any of us is one to talk, but with a power like that there's no way there ain't B or even A rank parties coming for her. What's she doing in a C rank party? Pearls before swine. Coins before a cat. There were phrases of equivalent meaning in this world as well. Still, I can see why those other girls are such a perfect match for her. There is that swordswoman. She chopped up that wood like it was toothpicks. And that attack mage, she has such exquisite control of her fire magic. And then there's that healing mage. She can use her healing spell so easily, and so many times. I bet they're all personal guards, hired to watch over that storage magic girl and heal her up just in case something happens. There's no way that many little firecrackers could have come together just by chance. You think she's a spy? Doubt it. She's way too useful to be expendable, and if she were, she wouldn't have been taking on jobs like this. And anyway, I really can't see it, not with a face as stupid as pure and simple as hers. You've got a point, the others replied. They were not a particularly courteous bunch. Still, it was impressive how accurately they guessed at the extent of the girl's abilities, even without having seen anything flashy beyond the storage magic. That was veteran hunters for you. Of course, the soldiers were not all fools, either. The hell was with that storage magic? She's like a demon. The commander's aide was focused on Miles' storage magic, but the commander himself had other things on his mind. Sure, there's that, but did you see that one with the sword? She tossed those logs up in the air and cut them into kindling with no more than 2 or 3 swipes of her blade. You lads, could any one of you cut a log mid-air like that, nothing holding it up? The men toward whom the commander's question was directed all shook their heads. And then, there was that fireball the other one conjured up without even moving, with just enough power to get that pot boiling. She controlled it so easily, with just enough force so that it slipped into the water. Have any of you ever seen anyone who could use magic like that? Once more, the soldiers shook their heads. And I don't think I even need to tell you all about that healing magic. Yeah, sure, maybe it was mostly scrapes and bruises, but I know that every single one of you was in line, and she healed each of you without even breaking a sweat. I've never heard of any mage who'd let all their magic get used up while they were out in the wild. Let alone for little stuff like that, not even in a battle or an emergency situation. Looking at this logically, I'd wager she didn't use more than a half, no maybe even no more than a third, of her power to do all that. Though, hell, I don't even know what logic means in this situation. The commander was a bit befuddled. At the very least, the unexpected powers that these girls, who they had thought would be nothing but dead weight, had shown them gave him a newfound respect for hunters as a whole. The next day, when the camp awoke, a delicious smell was wafting through the air. What is it? When the soldiers roused themselves, they found before them a mountain of bread and a steaming stew pot, along with a platter of salad. Get your breakfast combos, 5 half silver a plate. Today was the day of the big fight, and there would be no time for them to stop and have lunch. It seemed they had 2 breakfast choices, hardtack, a few scraps of jerky, and some water, or this hot, delectable, and filling array. There was not a man among them who had the slightest trouble deciding. No soldier would ever neglect his physical condition on such an important day just to save a few silver. Gee, gimme one. Me too. Can I have 2 portions? The soldiers came flooding over. All right, no need to rush. There's plenty to go around. Everyone gets seconds for free today, our treat. All right. Of course, it was not the best idea to fight on a full stomach, or really to have much food in your belly at all, but at least this time they were fighting against monsters and not people, so there was no chance of them being pierced in the gut by a spear or sword or arrow. Plus, given how far they still had to travel, it was equally important that they safeguard against fatigue and hunger in this case. And so, the soldiers ate their fill, in moderation, and set off triumphantly from the camp. This is the first time I've ever seen these men so full of life on one of these jobs. I owe my thanks to the Crimson Vow. The commander looked ahead to where the Crimson Vow walked before him and silently nodded his head. The group was about 2 hours out from their campsite when the commander shouted, "This is the place. Spread out and start patrolling." Where they now stood was the narrowest part of the forest, which was bordered on both sides by mountains. It was halfway between the national border and the outer edge of the forest on Marlene's side, and it was the ideal place to ambush and drive away any monsters that might come running their way. They would cut the beasts off here and let nothing get by them. That was their primary duty. The head of the platoon, the commander of this expedition, split the group up into 4 teams again, spreading them out to the left and right at intervals. They formed an unbreakable line that crossed the expanse of the area between the mountains. The moment that any monsters that came at them, no matter how many there were, they would be repelled in the opposite direction with no chance of slipping through between the patrols. As long as they were successful in getting all the monsters turned around here, all they would have to do afterward was keep driving them back all the way to the border. Of course, in the process, all of the ogres and goblins on their side of the line would be driven away as well. There was no way of distinguishing between the native inhabitants and the invaders, and besides, if those other scoundrels were going to drive all their beasts over to Marlene, then what was the harm in the Marlenians doing the same? Or so they figured, at least. Of course, they did have to be very careful not to drive away the orcs, jackalopes, deer, and boar that the local huntsmen took as their quarries. Diminishing the number of edible beasts and monsters in the area would be incredibly detrimental, not only to the local huntsmen but also to the people of the nearby city, who relied upon such creatures for nourishment. The neighboring country was apparently unconcerned about such matters, driving every creature in their woods, edible or not, indiscriminately towards Marlene. So when they were driving off the monsters, it was important not to lay a hand on the more valuable, edible creatures, allowing them to pass through unharmed. It was roughly 2 hours after all of the teams had gotten into position that Mile, with her superhuman senses of sight and hearing, first spotted something. They're coming. There's a huge mass of monsters and beasts up ahead. But they aren't all in one group, they're spread out. Hearing this, the other 3 members of the Crimson Vow gave a silent nod, while the soldiers looked on, perplexed. Mile's good at sensing these things, Mavis explained. If Mile says they're coming, then they're coming. Get ready. The soldiers appeared to still be half in disbelief, but thinking back to the incredible feats they had seen performed the day before, they silently nodded and drew their swords. Apparently, they could find it in themselves to have a bit of faith in Mile. They're here. After a short while, the soldiers, too, began to pick up on the signs of the approaching monsters. Raina gave a wicked grin, fangs bared. Let's do this. All right. 2 o'clock, 3 orcs, 200 meters ahead. Target irrelevant. No mark. Roger that, no mark. 1 o'clock, 4 goblins, 300 meters ahead. Mavis, dispatch the threat. On it. 11 o'clock, 6 kobolds, 150 meters ahead. Pauline, get 'em with a water spell. Okay. Following the directions of Mile, or rather, her radar, Raina issued commands, and one after the other, the Crimson Vow flew forth to repel the monsters, jumping right back into place after each attack as the men stared on silently. Occasionally even Mile and Raina took their turns, landing the girls a number of kills apiece. The soldiers of the second squad watched them, mouths agape. "See, Captain," started one man. "What is it?" the captain replied. This is kind of relaxing, huh?" "It sure is, huh?" The men fell silent again. Meanwhile, having been told that it wouldn't hurt to take just a few of the orcs, jackalopes, deer, and boar, Mile busied herself sniping a selection of each and storing them away into her loot box. These were not for turning into the guild but for eating. There was no need to pay the inflated prices at the butcher's shop when they could hunt their own meat, after all. The soldiers made sure to take down a few for their own meals that evening and the following morning as well. Of course, they only took 2 or 3 all told. With only around 50 people to feed, they wouldn't need much more than that, plus it would be difficult to carry home, and it would be bad form for a group of soldiers to go around masquerading as huntsmen. If they were to come back from battle hauling mountains of meat, the rumors would be absolutely scandalous. Meat, shorn from the bone, comprises about 70% of the pig's weight, and a further 70% of that is typically considered edible. In other words, roughly 49 kilograms of a 100-kilogram pig can be consumed as meat. And of course, an orc weighed considerably more than 100 kilograms, so taking down just one should have been plenty. That's